service, and profitability, I'll say that we wanted to do this both in the short term and the long term. We didn't want to have, let's say, short-term gain that might have a negative long-term effect.
Right, and I think that one of the beliefs here is that by improving customer service, you build long-run profitability because you build your franchise, your customer loyalty, the degree that they come to count on you as a place, a destination where they can reliably get the product they're looking for.
Right. I think the second point is really about, or what was most important to us, was to empower the associates. Again, we didn't want a scientific or a purely scientific solution to tell us what we needed to have in each store. And this was really an area where the science and the art had to meet.
Well, and if I might add, when we first sat down to meet, if you recall, Ed, we met you and Gordon and John Ling and a number of the key people in the company, and we spent about almost 3 hours talking, and we spent about an hour and a half talking about how to do profit optimizing of inventory, but we spent about an hour, half the time, talking about the company's culture and how important it was that solutions that work are ones that fit within the culture. And so we worked really hard to make this whole process something that aligned with Crate & Barrel's culture.
I think the last point, the real key word is risk. And, as any CIO can attest to, you don't want to introduce too many risks. If we were, say, doing store replenishment well, if we were doing initial buy well, we didn't want to introduce something that potentially would have a negative impact. So even though we were going to look at a solution that would largely, tell us how to optimize, we needed to have levers that would allow us to control the risk.
And I think we worked with you to help you manage that and implement that in a very easy way to do.
Well, how do we get this whole thing going? I think what really the first point is describing is, really that whole process from initial buy, vendor replenishment, allocation, store replenishment, and markdowns. We decided to model that entire process. And the way we did that was we supplied 4R with 2 years of detail history. And by detail, location, SKU, level sales, inventory, other information about the product,
cost, supply
pricing,
yep.
Weekly. Then we took the information from 2 years ago, or working with 4R, the first year, and modeled that. Then we used the models in the second of the 2 years, and then compared the two.
And ran simulations and analyses that allowed us to understand if we were to apply these profit optimizing approaches to these various decisions, how much improvement could be found in the business.
I think, the big question, and I guess I should go back and really kind of say that, yes, we did find opportunities everywhere. We found it in store replenishment for year-round, for seasonal product, in price optimization, in vendor replenishment. There were opportunities across the board. So now you have the question, where do you start? And as somebody who's maybe a little risk-averse, I don't necessarily want to do a big bang. I don't necessarily want to come in with completely new systems for store replenishment, allocation, vendor replenishment, et cetera, all in one shot. So then the question sort of comes up, do you start at the top or the bottom? And at the time, there was a fair amount of debate as to where to start. Quite frankly, I was probably okay starting in either direction. We decided to start on the bottom, and in retrospect, I think that was a very good choice, because when you start at the bottom, when you start with store replenishment, you're really building a better base of information that then can be used to better support the sort of top-level merchandising decisions.
Well, if I might add, too, one of the things that we've seen talking to a number of retailers is that That's a great place to start because it's really the only echelon of supply chain where the cash register rings. It's where you make your money and you lose your money in many regards. Clearly, upstream matters, but by getting that area working efficiently and best, it starts to give you great data on how to improve the other areas.
And I think one other thing that we realized somewhere in here was that that each level of optimization needs to operate effectively in a non-optimal world. That if you're optimizing store replenishment, well, and you're not optimizing the initial buy or the vendor replenishment, you're going to have some issues. Well, guess what? I think even if you optimize, you're going to have some issues.
Right.
And but it I think really helped us in some sense make store replenishment more bulletproof.
So let's talk a little bit about how we look at store inventory. And first of all, we talked about this notion of uncertainty or variability. And if you look at this particular chart, you'll see this is a number of weeks of sales for a particular item in a particular store. And you'll notice that there's a highly varying pattern here. I mean, the average is about 11, 12, or 13 units per week, but some weeks are as high as 40, other weeks are as low as a couple of units or one. And the big question is, how much inventory should we put into the store, right? Because this is a very highly random demand.
And I should say we didn't just pick this because it proved the point and looked at on the slide.
This is a very typical.
Very typical.
Reality is it's like going to a roulette wheel, which is there are 36, 37 numbers or 38 depending on what part of the world you're in. Each of those numbers comes up roughly 1 in every 38 times, so it's very random. So what are our choices for how we might go about setting the inventory? And in the traditional inventory management space, really a lot of people work on things like setting inventory to weeks of supply, setting inventory to deliver a certain service level or in stock. And one of the things that our founders, professors from Wharton and Harvard thought was that was a little bit like asking the retailer to tell you the answer and say, we'll just help you get the answer you've picked. But that maybe we ought not to be agnostic about what that number should be, but we might want to have a way of figuring out what number made the most sense. And does it make sense to set inventory to a constant weeks of supply or to deliver a certain service level for different products if the products have different margins, if they have different lead times, if their variability of demand is different in one store versus another store? And so the philosophy that we've been applying is to say, let's understand what the relationship between our investment in inventory is and the return we get on it, the profit. And what we need to do is consider the fact that there are different margins and lead times and variability of sales, and that we understand the cost trade-offs that exist in the decision. And I'll make a point here. There are two different kinds of products out there. One we would call basic goods or replenishment goods. And basically there, it's how much money do I want to plunk down into my inventory in my stores and my DCs versus what is the cost of lost sales, because I'm willing to put more money into the inventory if I get enough of a return on it. A fashion good or a seasonal good, it's a little bit of a different trade-off because it's usually a fixed buy where I went offshore potentially and bought $15,000 of a particular item and the cost is fixed. And now it's really a question of if I push it all out now, I might strand the inventory at the end of the season, but if I hold it back, I might lose sales early in the season. And how do I balance those two things? And we're going to talk about the replenishment case here. So one of the things that we can do by looking at this historical data is we can actually apply our models and we can build, and this curve that you see here with a green dot on it is called an efficient frontier. And it basically says for a given level of inventory, if I were to be very smart about which stores and which items I put that inventory, how much lost sales should I experience if I'm analyzing the demand patterns of those products well? And then the red dot was actually where we saw Crate and Barrel. Now, we didn't put the scale on here because this is confidential information, so it's kind of hard to know the absolute magnitudes. And I will say they were very efficient. But nonetheless, we saw that there was a significant opportunity to lower the amount of lost sales, even at the same level of weeks of supply of inventory. It would be allocated in different products and in different stores than it was beforehand, but it would lower sales an awful lot. And I think an important point is that lowered sale isn't just the increased profitability, but it's also a customer who didn't get a chance to walk out the door with the product that they wanted does walk out the door with the product they wanted. Now, one other point is the green dot that is on this chart identifies the profit optimal amount of inventory, and this was for the entire chain. And by profit optimal, what we mean is that if I added another $100 of inventory, $1,000 of inventory, that incremental cost of inventory would be more than the amount of profit that would be generated by that inventory or cost of that inventory. So the profit would be negative. If we took inventory away, we would save inventory costs, but we'd be losing sales at a faster rate and the margin dollars associated with that. So again, we would be reducing profitability. So in this particular case, we were saying that a slightly more amount of inventory, but allocated differently between stores and SKUs, would generate a higher degree of profitability and lower lost sales.
And I can add to this that this was a little bit of a surprising result. We thought with our emphasis on customer service and being in stock that, if anything, we would probably be taking some inventory out. What, in general, we were saying, we're overall at the right level, but certainly in some SKUs we did not have enough, and that was again to us a surprising finding.
But beyond looking at this at a kind of a macroeconomic level, one of the things that we also did was we could break this data down, and we're showing one illustrative chart here. We also did it by stores, but each dot here is a particular SKU, and we looked at the performance of that SKU when we would change the inventory policy around that SKU. The lighter, fuchsia dots are ones where we generated more profitability. In other words, our actions generated a lot more profit than what cost to do those actions. And the dark blue ones are ones that we actually didn't do as well. And remember, this is like going to Las Vegas and betting on blackjack hands. We don't expect to win every hand, but we want to win more of the hands and get bigger payoffs. And if I can illustrate one point here, for example, there was one, the y-axis going upward is when we added inventory. If it's negative, we took inventory out. And the x-axis, as you go to the right, is we generated more sales, versus if we go to the left, we generated less sales. And you'll notice there's a dot. It's the second one from the right. It's about a $1,500 improvement in gross margin dollars, and that was generated with an incremental cost of positioning of inventory of about $80. So it was a very large return on investment. You'll notice even that there are some products in the lower right-hand quadrant where we actually took inventory out of the system but generated more sales because of how we allocated that. It turned out that these conclusions, which products were involved here, made a lot of sense to Crate & Barrel and actually helped them really understand where the incremental sales were coming from and build confidence in the fact that we were on the right path to building more profitability.
Well, how did this whole thing get started then? How did we go from really the benchmarking to rolling this out? Well, we started with a pilot. We identified 5 stores. They were diverse, geographically diverse, customer diverse, size, and we made minor modifications to that 20-year-old ordering worksheet that I had described before. Basically, we just included on there the optimized, recommended inventory level. And then we added a little bit of processing that allowed us to measure people's acceptance of the numbers. But the stores had, complete autonomy to really be able to place the order for whatever quantity that they desired. I think one thing that I want to emphasize here is training. Was very important. I think, we put people on that full time. It was very important for the people in the store to understand the thought process, not just here's a number, and to be able to give feedback as to, here's some things that maybe you should take into account, or here's some specific knowledge that I have about my store and my environment that there's no way that you could know, and I'm not going to choose the number. But the key was really so that the training, that the personnel in the stores, the management of the stores understood the thought process behind the recommendations.
And this was a lot of aligning with the culture and making sure